So yeah, we're going to share a wee bit about service design and that type of collaborative approach to planning, and it might be useful if you've got a pen and a bit of paper near you. That would be quite good just for your own thoughts as you move through. It will not be too taxing on you, I promise, this afternoon, but also just to say that the slides will be available to you. I'm hoping that you can see the slides now, and maybe Mary will give me a shout if she can't see them. As has been said, the session is going to be recorded, but please don't let that stop you from chipping in, because it probably will just be a recording that will be used internally anyway, so please don't worry about that, but also make use of the chat if you think there are things that you want to ask or know a wee bit more about, and I'm sure Mary will monitor that for me. So before we start getting into, I suppose, what service design really is about, I'm going to ask you just to consider in your own head a few provocation questions. You don't really need to answer them at all. You might want to jot down some answers if you think so. But they're really just to get you thinking about how you plan and plan for anything really, I suppose, within your professional life. So how many times have each of us had a grid sent out and asked us to complete it, something to do with improvement planning? And how many of us have planned, whether it's for an improvement plan or a curriculum plan or whatever kind of plan, using that prescribed grid or template by sitting with it, maybe with colleagues, and just putting in your answers into the grid or the template? And I just wondered as well, have you ever dutifully fulfilled that ask, I suppose, by passing that grid on to colleagues and asking them to complete their own section of priorities? How many years have your curriculum plans been constructed in an almost identical way to the year before? How many surveys have you issued to school communities to tick that box of engagement? And how many paper evaluations have you collectively sought over your years in education? And crucially, I suppose, how have you used all of that? I'm sure, absolutely certain, that some of you on this call will have had much more effective systems than I ever did for using that gathered information. But I'm also sure that some of you, or some of the staff that you know, will have been like me and maybe kind of hunter-gatherer of information. But actually, does it really help you to fulfil the need? And does it really change the thing that needs to be changed to make the learning experience better for the learners? Because it's what we know, we might stick to similar plans year to year without any major tweaks, just very slight changes, and without much thought of whether that's actually the right solution for our school, for our staff, for our learners and for our families, and the specific challenges that they might face right now. For the sake of filling in a particular section of a planning grid, we might even uncritically adopt ideas that might not even suit our own need. Dr. Simon Breakspear, who you might know, might have heard of, senior lecturer in the School of Education at the University of New South Wales, talks about this through his Agile Leadership programme. You might have been part of that. They filter into the professional learning and leadership programmes at Education Scotland. I would really encourage you, if you get the chance, really useful. He talks about that uncritical adoption of ideas, and he talks about, the bought packages. How often do we chase after, for example, the bought package? And do we do that because it's right for our context, or just because we uncritically adopt what other people do because they must do it right, because we respect them, or because their school's running really well? And he asked the question, are you completing the template or are you fulfilling the need? That kind of formulaic-based approach to planning can end up that you're overloaded with unrealistic commitments, and I think, well, I can certainly say I have been there in my past, and you become overly committed to a whole range of stuff that actually you're really just paying lip service to, or that you're trying to contrive a way to show progress in that area. Service design and its interactivity should take that formulaic response to planning and turn it into something much more collaborative and much more creative, something that's much more responsive. And if you let it and the conditions are right, it can be something that's a wee bit fun and a bit different from your kind of grid format. I recently met with a school looking to reimagine their curriculum, and their question to me that, to be honest, we hear quite a lot is, where do we start? What's the biggest priority? What nationally is seen as the big thing that people, what's the big ticket item that people want us to be looking at? And they'll rhyme off and we'll talk about play and outdoor learning and IDL and literacy and numeracy and health and wellbeing, etc., etc., etc. And it's overwhelming. And it can lead to that kind of scattergun approach to curriculum rather than a real focus on what are the specific needs of these learners who are right in front of me right now. The service design process should take you from what Simon Breakspear calls strategic confusion of what is the priority that I'm supposed to be working on, to having a real clarity about what's the right move for your people at this particular moment. And to be clear this afternoon, if you're here looking for something that's revolutionary, it's not. It's simple, and you can dip in and out of it. You can dip in and out of the tools for anything that you're working on. I'm going to share today 4 tools, and you might already know them. You might already use some of them. You might even find as you're working through these that you think some of them might be useful for your learners as they learn to plan things. It might even be planning their own learning. So to cut to the chase, what is service design? Okay, so it really helps you get into the head of your users and to know what they think and the things that cause them particular issue. It's a process for designing services globally and it's used by loads of international companies. But to be honest, it's also a wee bit Marmite because it does involve using tools. And as we know, some people love that and some people on this call might love that. But also some people might hate that. And only you're going to know if this is the right approach to pursue in your school. And I'm really happy, and Mary as well, to have a follow-up conversation at a later date if you want to talk more about it. If you've got more questions about it, we would be really glad to do that. But you also need to be prepared in a service design approach for what your users are going to say, because your groups need to include those disruptors. And we've all maybe been there in the past where we have wanted to adopt an approach quickly and therefore we've gone for people who think like us. But the purpose of service design is that it can't be like that. It has to be the people who are really going to challenge your thinking. But you also need to be prepared for the solutions that might be arrived at through the process because they might not be what you thought you needed. And they might also be quite far removed from what you consider to be traditional. But that's the whole point. It's about innovative and creative ways of doing things. Nothing's off the table. Blue sky thinking is really encouraged. And while I don't underestimate the challenges by any measure or means that you have faced over the past 2 years and that you continue to face on a daily basis, and I say that as a mum with 2 children who've had COVID in the past week or 2, but if the past 2 years and everything that young people and teachers have been through haven't given us license to do things a wee bit differently, what will? I personally see this as being a real moment, a real tipping point for if you were sitting on the cusp and thinking, I want to do things differently, but I'm hitting my head against a brick wall. There's a great opportunity here, and many of us know that. A big selling point for me about service design is that where other methods of data collection might need to be sifted through over a period of time, like the stuff that we talked about at the beginning, service design lets you synthesise information as part of that process just there and then. And I think that's a really big selling point for schools. And it's already changed the practice of a range of schools across the country. And I'll talk a wee bit about some of those as we move through. But examples of that would be Calder Glen High School in South Lanarkshire talk about how it's really revolutionised their curriculum and their curriculum offer for their learners. Dice Primary in Aberdeen City talk about how it's really revolutionised their outdoor learning and their play-based approaches. And there are many more. West Lothian Inclusion and Wellbeing Service, not too far along the road from you, I'm sure, talk about how it's really helped them to have a bespoke curriculum offer for their specific type of learner. So it is a process that's working for lots of people, and I suppose that's why I think some of it might be worth sharing today. So the double diamond diagram that you should see on the screen now is a guide through that process that's been developed by the Design Council, and you'll see their email address down the bottom. That's quite an interesting website to have a look at if you have time or if you have a member of staff who might be quite interested in this. There are videos, there are provocations, so well worth a look. And you'll see the design principles at the top. So it's a people-centred approach, not paperwork. We've said that. At its core is communication in a range of ways, and it's about designing services with people who use them, not for them. So you're continually adapting to what you're told by your users. So as we begin the double diamond process, you'll see over on the left segment, the first of those diamonds. Importantly, to the left of that, it begins with a challenge. What is the problem that you have? So to give a few examples of challenges that other educators have used service design tools for, a primary example, I've spoken a wee bit there about we need to do more outdoor learning, but we're not really sure how. Additional support needs. We need a more bespoke curriculum for our learners. Secondary school, we're having behavioural issues with a particular cohort of our learners. So I'm just going to stop there for 1 minute, and I'm going to set a timer for a minute to give you a wee bit of thinking time. What might be the challenge that you bring with you today? And it might be that you don't have one, which would be fabulous. But what are the things that you're grappling with just now? And I'm going to give you just a minute to jot down a few ideas. You're not going to share these, don't worry. Just 1 minute. So hold that challenge in your head throughout this process and think about how you might use the tools that we're going to share to explore that challenge a wee bit more. So the first part of the process is the discovery phase over on the left-hand side of the diamond, and this is where you're trying to gather information about your challenge. So how do you do that? So if you want to walk away with ideas without the gathering that we talked about before, so without all the paperwork, the grids, etc. that we talked about before, the best way to do that in a service design approach is to have your users represented at the table. Gather together representatives from everyone who has a stake in that challenge that you're talking about and give them a voice. And that might be the learner, might be the teacher, might be the family, it might be the community. And when rules allow, you could do that in person, or you can do it virtually as well. We did some virtual sessions with the Service Design Academy, and we used a Teams call and we used a Miro board to collect thoughts. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy and it takes a bit of training, etc., but there are ways to do it digitally as well. But equally, you could do it in-house, and we'll come on to some of that later as well. If you don't feel ready to bring together a cross-community group, you could maybe gather some vox pops and use them as provocations, and maybe even your learners could gather some of those for you from your local community or from your parents or from your teaching staff, etc. If you're feeling really adventurous in this discovery phase, you could take an empathy walk, and lots of people I know already use this, but there's a great example of that from a primary school in Glasgow who were looking at community co-design of curriculum, and they did a staff empathy walk around their local area to really see the local context. What were the learning opportunities? What were the networks they could tap into? What were the problems and how were they reflected in their curriculum offer? What will come out of this segment, this section, may be more questions than answers. It's not a clean process. Design is really messy. But it's good messy because it gives you that cross-fertilisation of ideas and causing you to challenge that traditional thinking. So if we move on to the second section of this, the define segment, at that stage we're really trying to hone in on what the problem actually is. We're not jumping to solutions. And this is where it might feel a wee bit scary because you might not like what you're hearing. And if you're buying into this approach, you really need to be prepared for that you might not like what people have to say. The discovery phase will have generated a lot of ideas and questions and thoughts. You now need to ask people to synthesise some of that information. Do these thoughts and questions sit in different themes? Do they sit in different categories? They probably do. So you begin in this stage to map out those themes, and then you begin to collaboratively prioritise them. What do the group agree are the most important elements? And I hope you can see how by using this process, everyone's voice is heard and there's power in that collective voice. So you as the leader aren't deciding the next move. The power is fully with the community co-design group. So I'm going to show you some tools just now Very basic tools that could help you move through the discovery and define sections. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask Mary to put you in breakout rooms to try these. So the first is an old favourite, you'll all have used it, I'm sure. If you've brought together a stakeholder group, and remember you've got to have included your disruptors in that, you could give them a theme and ask them to bring along an artefact to describe their feelings. So to explain this a wee bit, this was done really successfully with the Learner Pathways group of the NOTOSH sessions that we undertook in 2020. So the group were asked to bring something that represented their curriculum offer. And the first thing that they did when they went into their groups was to share what they had brought and why they had brought it. So some people brought a photograph, some people brought a timetable. It's just a way in. It gets people talking. So that's quite a good way, quite a creative way in if you think that the people that you're working with would be quite responsive to that. Or you could do what I'm going to do today, which is to offer a provocation, a question or a video or a piece of writing. And there are some great provocations out there, and we'll be happy to direct you to some of those if you would like to kind of think about that. So it might be a question, it might be one that came out of the NOTOSH series was how do we help learners to be well as to learn well? Others that we've had, Galashiels Academy talk about, why are this particular cohort of young people causing us more issue than all of the others within their year group. So you can start to use that as a provocation. So I want you just to take another wee minute just now and to think back to your challenge, the thing that you think that you're facing, and to think about, is there a provocation question that you could use that's associated with that, and jot it down. And I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to do that just now. Okay. So you would then have a really broad discussion and take time to do that. Don't rush it. 20 minutes even, thoughts, questions, ideas, ramblings, whatever. Gather it on a flip chart or a digital page or post-its on a wall. And I realise it might sound quite flippant to say take time to do this. I realise that time is really tight, but this could form maybe an in-service day activity. It could be part of a parent council meeting. It could be something that is led by a learner group. So take a wee bit of time just to do that exploration. And when that's been done, ask the group to start to distill all of those points into themes or categories and to rate them. Which brings us on to the second tool, a Diamond 9. And again, you might have used this before, but you bring the information back from your group in 3 high priorities, 3 medium priorities, and 3 lower priorities. And the important thing is that the group who've created all of these ideas and thoughts have agreed on these as being the priorities to be taken forward. So after saying don't rush this, because we're doing a short session, I am going to rush through this a wee bit more. I'm not going to give you 20 minutes to talk about it. I would like you to have in your groups quite a broad discussion on this question. How do we make IDL a key element of 21st century curriculum? And I suppose the point of today, I'm going to jump between different themes, but it's just to let you talk about some of these things as well as the service design element. Please take a photograph of that or jot it down. And I'm going to ask Mary to put you into random groups, and I'd like you to discuss this for about 7 minutes and then to spend about 7 minutes agreeing on the top 3 priorities. We're not doing the whole 9 of them, we're just going to look at the top 3. And when you're brought back, I wonder if some of you might be willing to stick them in the chat. Now, you'll notice I've been quite specific about the time. 7 minutes tends to get people working more quickly and to be much more focused than if you give them the luxury of 10 minutes. So just a quick recap, we're going to take 14 minutes in total, 7 minutes for a broad discussion on this question and 7 minutes for bringing back 3 main priorities. So Mary, if you're all right to ping everybody off. It's always quite interesting after you go to a breakout room to see if many people come back. So thank you for coming back and welcome back. If you feel able to do that, that was a really short space of time to do that activity, but if you feel able to stick any of those priorities in the chat, please do that. Or, and I know that we're being filmed, but if you've got any comments that you would like to make, you would be most welcome to come in and say that. Or if you want to say anything in the chat about you know, the idea of the provocation brainstorm followed by a diamond 9. If you think that that's something you could use for your own future challenges, please just stick that in the chat too. So, Mary, you can maybe just keep a wee eye on that for me and bring anything in if there are people who want to. We're just about to move on to the next stage of the design process, which is the development stage. And if I just show you the diamond 9 again so that you kind of remember where we are. So we've just kind of done the discovery very quickly and the define very quickly, and we're moving through into this development section. So the point of this really is developing ideas and solutions to the priorities that you've just arrived at. Dundee and Angus College deliver a Service Design Personal Development Award digitally. And if you walk away from this and there's a wee element that you think, oh, I'm quite interested in that, it's definitely worth pursuing that with them. It's a really good course. I've done it myself. Colleagues have done elements of it as well. This next tool, the Lotus Blossom, is their take. Theirs is called the Sunflower. It's their take on the Lotus Blossom, which is a tool by Phil Delalong. The point of this tool is that it lets you go a wee bit deeper into some of those priorities. So the Sunflower asks you to take one of the priorities from earlier and to work with your group. So you're still with your group, you're still doing it on the same day, and to consider solutions to that. So if, for example, one of the priorities that you raised through the IDL question was something like we need to better link literacy and numeracy with other areas of the curriculum. You would stick that in the middle of this grid, this pink flower. That would be the post-it note that you would put in there. And the group would then work to think of 8 ways that this could be improved upon or done more effectively. So you're solutionising. Instead of focusing on the issue and the problem, you're working as a collaborative group to think about what are the solutions to this, how do we get better at this. If you've got several groups, so say for example you did it as part of an in-service day and you had maybe 3 groups of 8, you could have the 3 groups working on different priorities and you could rotate them so that you're adding more ideas each time and getting that kind of cross-fertilisation of ideas. Or if you have a question and you've solutionised round here and one of the solutions is a wee nugget of gold and you think, you know, that would be brilliant, but we need to do a bit more thinking on that, you could take that and put it in the middle of a sunflower and ask people to ideate more solutions of how you go a wee bit deeper into that theme as well. So the purpose of this tool is really adding more depth. Yeah, you've got your priority, but what are the things? How do we get closer to it? What are the things that we need to do in order for this to be seen through? This tool also works really well if you know that you've got staff who aren't confident to speak out, because you can stick it up on a staff room wall and you can ask people to anonymously contribute a post-it note. And strangely this morning I had a conversation with the head teacher of Park Primary in Clickmannanshire, and she talked about having movable planning boards. So she has basically boards on wheels that she rotates around different parts of her school, and people can contribute as and when they feel able to do that. Now you could also in our digital world do that really nicely on some kind of Google Doc or some kind of OneNote space or whatever, but it's about really going deeper into these themes. If you're doing it on kind of post-it notes or in a written form, then the Service Design Academy, who I talked about earlier, stressed the importance of using a Sharpie type pen, because that depersonalises any notes and it's not about one person's voice being more important than another, but that people can put their view across without the fear of people knowing that it was them, I suppose. I'll move on to the next section just now. And this is going to be a wee bit back and forward, but I'm going to ask you shortly to go back into your groups. But because this is not really an authentic service design workshop, it's more about sharing bits about service design with you, I'm going to ask you to consider a new theme for this tool. And I'm going to ask you to think about play pedagogy, which you could argue, I suppose, links really quite well with IDL pedagogy. So the question that I'm asking you is, we need to increase opportunities for a play-based approach in our primary setting, hypothetical. And what we're looking for here are 8 of your best blue sky thinking ideas. And remember, that's the point. It's to be the things that are outside the box, the things that you know that you would normally straight away disregard. What are your really blue sky thinking approaches to increasing play pedagogy across a primary setting? So again, I'm going to give you 7 minutes to do this, which is not a long time. And if you can come back with, if you're able to come back with your 8 ideas, that would be brilliant. So Mari, can I ask you if you could ping the groups back to Narnia?
Certainly, Elizabeth, and we're just looking for the same groups again?
Same groups in just 7 minutes. I think what we'll do, because we're being recorded, we usually would stop after each of these tools and kind of ask for feedback. But I think what we'll do is I've got one more to share with you and a wee recap, and then we can have the kind of Q&A discussion if you like, and that means we can cut that out of any recording that's then going to be put anywhere, if that suits you. So I do hope though that you're finding that these tools are kind of worthy of discussion and facilitating discussion about curriculum making, but I hope you also can see that they're not rocket science, and that you know it is part of a process, so one tool should lead quite neatly into the other tool. This final one is a Service Design Academy tool, and it takes some of the solutions you've looked at in the Lotus Blossom and starts to break these into different planning sections. And I don't know if you're going to be able to read the text, so I'll read it to you, the kind of key points of it. So one of the segments there of this planning pizza is, what can you do now? What are your quick wins that you can get away with? What are the time considerations, maybe over a longer period of time? And you might want to look at that kind of, you know, short-term, medium-term, long-term change. What are you looking for? Maybe if you're working with groups of learners, this next one is more appropriate. What would make this the best thing ever? What are you hoping to get out of it? And what are the things that you need access to? And that might be from your local authority, it might be from Education Scotland, it might be from your families or your local community. What are the things that the group agree that are necessary for this to be seen through? And what are the likely barriers? And if you have likely barriers, there are other tools that we can share with you that are about exploring those barriers in more depth. So one example would be a problem tree, where you look at the problem and you look at the effect if you don't solve the problem, and you look at how you go about solving that problem. So there are lots of different tools for different purposes in service design as well. And another segment there of how will you know when you've been successful? What are you looking for out of this? What are the group looking for? What's the change that they want to see? And that's again back to that Simon Breakspear point of the real clarity. You know, what is the strategic clarity? What are you trying to achieve for your groups of learners? So I'm not going to put you into groups for this one. I'm just going to leave you to consider it. And it could also be that this is the point, you know, where your original planning grid comes back into being, the one that you've to submit to whoever it is that you've to submit it to. You might then take the information from this and kind of transport it back into that. But the key point is you've not done your planning on that grid. You've had that really blue sky thinking about it, and now you're moving back to the grid or to whatever way you want to present that. So you've defined the problem, you've solutionized the problem, and then you're able to go back to whatever kind of planning model you would want to after that. So to just do a really quick recap on the process we've talked about this afternoon, you begin with that challenge, that's really important, and you bring a group together with your disruptors, with everybody who is a user of that service that the challenge relates to, and you maybe use a provocation and a brainstorming tool. Then you begin to define the problem through something like a Diamond 9 process. You begin to develop thoughts and solutions through a Lotus Blossom. And then you make a plan for how you're going to deliver it using something like a planning pizza. And as I've said, that might be where you go back to your original grid, but the key thing there is you might go back to your original grid with 3 priorities that are pressing priorities that your community feel that you need to be working on, rather than 23 priorities that everybody's thrown into the mix that actually is not really going to impact anything. Crucially in service design, you'll notice there's the wee bubble at the end that's outcome. You need an outcome. It can't just be talking for talking's sake. It's not just about having these conversations as part of an in-service day and then everybody walks away and goes back to how they were doing things in the past. It's about real change and implementing real change. And, you know, it goes without saying, and you know this, but if you're bringing people along to this type of approach, if you're asking people, it's the same as, you know, if you ask learners for their views, they need to see the change that they're asking for, or else, you know, what's the point? And that can be demoralising as well and can do more harm than good. There are millions of service design tools out there. Most of them are open source. And if you like this type of approach and are quite interested in it, you can even just Google service design tools and hundreds of thousands of them come up. I've shared 4 very basic tools with you to just get you going if you're interested in it. And I'd love to know if you think that you would find them useful. More than that, I'd love to know if you go away and use them and they've been successful, because that's then something that we can share with more people of that type of approach. So please, you know, if you are interested, do get in touch.